We certainly live in an age of major renaissance of board gaming, and to an extent we are also experiencing a minor, less striking renaissance or return of the game book. This form of ludic narrative that was very popular in the 1980s. When people think about game books, they think about Choose Your Own Adventure books, which is the most famous series of interactive fiction. To me, those are not exactly game books because very often you do not have a victory slash loss condition. That is, you do not have a specific goal that you need to achieve. You just experience the story as it branches out in different directions, and there are no game mechanics. When I think about game books, I like to think of games that have game mechanics. You roll dice, you manage an inventory, you have changing stats that describe your culture, and also you have specific objectives that tell you whether you won or lost the challenge. So we experienced a little bit of a return of those, with old game books being reprinted and new ones being published. And today I want to tell you about a series of these books that came out in the 1980s and was recently reprinted. They reprinted all of the original volumes, so those of the original run, and also two new volumes have been added. And that series, one of my favorite ones back then, and now I reread all the old ones that I read back then, and I also read the new ones. This series that I liked so much back then and I still like is The Way of the Tiger. The Way of the Tiger, as I said, several volumes, some original ones, some new ones, 6 original ones, and 2 new ones. So let's start talking first in general about the setting, the system, and then I'll give you a really quick overview of the various volumes so you can see which ones may be more interesting for you. But I'm going to tell you already, read them in order, start from volume 1 and go on. They're not all equally good, but that's the way to go. Back to us. The Way of the Tiger, it's a very original, it takes place in a very original fantasy setting. You know, usually we talk about low fantasy, which is like Twilight, when it's our world with fantasy elements transplanted into our world. Like in Twilight, it's our world with vampires and werewolves. Then you have high fantasy, which takes place in a completely separate place, Lord of the Rings, Song of Ice and Fire. This is what I would call middle fantasy, which takes place in a separate world, which is the world of Orb, with orcs, golems, wizards, all the traditional trappings of high fantasy. But then you have elements from our world transplanted there. In particular here, you have ninjas, you have a cult tradition of warriors that, well, they're ninjas, they're called ninja, they act like ninjas, they have the kind of skills that we associate with that. So there's a little bit of an Oriental, Japanese-themed element here. And if you think about the fact that these books were originally written in the 1980s, that makes sense. That was a time where ninja movies were pretty popular in the West too. So it's a peculiar combination. If nothing else, it's very original. It's very different from traditional fantasy, like the fighting fantasy series, or just more generic fantasy that was particularly popular at the time, and in the middle of the 1980s was already overdone. People were already getting a little tired. And in truth, there was a previous series called Lone Wolf, and that I'll cover in one of my future videos, a previous series of game books that in a sense already seem to be inspired by martial arts, by the idea of mystical warriors that had various disciplines, specialized in different disciplines. But Lone Wolf was high fantasy. It just seemed like it was already inspired by martial arts movies and culture, just completely mediated and filtered through a high fantasy filter. Here, there is more of a hybrid. You have ninja culture in a fantasy world. So you will have ninjas fighting against monsters. You also have a little bit of a Cthulhu theme. There are elder creatures and monsters and other elements clearly inspired by Lovecraft. So it's a hybrid idea, it's a little bit of a patchwork world, but it works. It has a nice, unique flavor to it. As for the game system, what makes this game, the system pretty unique, or at least it has a system that is not used very often, is that it is very tactical. In Fighting Fantasy, when a fight starts, you roll dice over and over again, and there are some decisions that you can make, whether to use a certain item or not, whether to use luck, if you know the Fighting Fantasy system. In other game systems, other game book system, you have similar things. It's mainly about whether or not to use a potion, which weapon you use, but you do not have very tactical decisions. This game book series started with an almost simulationist idea, which was to give the player meaningful tactical options and then to describe each combat in detail so that there would be clues for the reader to try to identify what the best strategy is. Well, first, there is a system of martial arts moves that you can choose from. So you have the winged horse kick, the leaping tiger kick, then you have 3 types, then you have another kick here, 3 types of punches and 3 types of throws. And here you have an illustration that gives you the sense of what they look like. Then combats, basically you will choose which of those you want to use. Now, they will not be available in all combats. Usually, in each combat, you're given the option to choose between a throw, a kick, and a punch. So there is that pre-selection given, but sometimes you have multiple options. You may choose among multiple punches. You may choose to throw a shuriken. You may choose to use other attacks. But usually, you have a punch, a kick, and a throw, and some other options. Depending on which you choose, you will direct it to a paragraph where you will be given a target number that you roll against. This is classic. You roll dice, you apply modifiers, and you're trying to meet or exceed the target number. What is interesting is that the target number will differ based on the tactics that you use. So that means that if you're using a certain attack, which is particularly effective in that situation, in that context against that enemy, you will get a low target number. It will be easier for you to hit the opponent. If not, if you did not choose an optimal attack, then you will have a higher target number. It seems a simple idea, but it really gives a dimension to combat, gives it an intensity, gives it even an immersiveness that is unknown to most other game books. You really have to study the situation, you really have to imagine what it would feel like to be there, and see and to identify in the text what are the elements that are important to identify the right attack, to identify the right approach. I'll give you an example. Very minor spoiler. It is from paragraph 1. It is from the first combat that you have in the first volume, and so it's not gonna be that much of a spoiler. Also, because in this case, identifying which one is the worst attack is very easy. It is the first combat. The text makes it easy for you. Later, it will be harder to identify the right clues. It is a fight that you're facing against actually another disciple. You are a student of the ninja arts, and here you're graduating and need to fight against another student, a guy called Gorobei, who is also a recurring character in later installments. And you're given a description of what Gorobei looks like, and this is what's important here. In other situations, the environment will be more important. But here you're told that Gorobei, quote, is clad only in a loincloth, and his rippling muscles gleam with an oil that will make it difficult to keep a grip on him. You must defeat it in unarmed combat in order to be allowed to undertake the spiritual test, which will show whether you're ready to become a grandmaster. And then you have the options of what you could do. Use the leaping tiger kick, cobra strike punch, whirlpool throw, or if you have acrobatic skills, you can try to somersault to Gorobei's side before attacking him. And depending on your choice, you will turn to the corresponding section. Now here the text told you that he is covered in oil, so it will be difficult to get a grip, and so probably trying a throw would be a pretty bad idea, because a throw is precisely when you're grabbing an opponent. Suppose that you are silly enough that you want to try that, so we turn to that paragraph and we're told the heck you're doing. You raise your foot as if to kick Gorobei in the chest, but spin to his side instead and take hold of his arms to pinch him over your hip in the whirlpool throw. You rapidly learn your mistake, however, as your grip slides on the oil which covers him, and he uses his skill as a wrestler to grab you, etc., etc., etc. Again, this is the first encounter ever, so the text is giving you a sense of how it works, and you're like, well, when they meant in the introduction the combat is tactical, they weren't kidding. And again, here the text is making it easy for you because it's telling you his muscles gleam with oil that will make it difficult to keep a grip on him. In later encounters, if you were to face the same situation on a later encounter when the text takes for granted that you have figured out how it works and is actually challenging you, the description will only tell you about the muscles gleaming with oil, will not tell you they will make it difficult. You have to figure that out. Also, he is bigger than you, and in general, throwing opponents that are bigger than you is a bad idea. It's a bad idea unless there are other circumstances that mitigate that. Maybe the opponent is in a situation where the opponent is out of balance. Then even if the opponent is bigger than you, you may take a chance. So what is really neat is the game takes the mission of presenting you with tactical challenges seriously. And I'm gonna give you another example which will be a little more of a spoiler. I'll try not to tell you too much. I will not tell you which is the optimal choices, but I will tell you which is a bad choice and why. And why the text uses, and how the text really has an immersive quality, really encourages you to think of yourself as the hero that is in there. In fighting fantasy, sometimes you're just fighting against the mind of the opponent. Fighting fantasy game books, they have a strong puzzle quality. So if you know how a certain writer works, you're simply trying to figure out the puzzle, to outsmart the author. Here it really is about imagining that you are there and try to figure out what the challenge is and what the best course of action is. Makes it much more immersive, makes it much more an RPG than a puzzle or a riddle. Now, here in this other example that I'm showing you, well, you're trying to take down a guard to get access to the area where the main villain lives. And here we are. At last, the moist wind is about you again as you peep out over the top step onto the flat roof of the keep. The three turrets, surprisingly large now that you're so close, still boast their flags, which are faintly illuminated by the glow of a charcoal brazier. So it's at night, we're approaching the area where you know that the guard is. We are high on the keep, and, well, the situation is the one that I just described. With his back to this stove is the captain of the guard, clad in black armor. Every now and then he patrols the battlements from one turret to another before returning to warm himself at the brazier. He has taken his helmet off and he's standing in the glow of the charcoals. By the way, it's a very nice scene. It's very well described. It's very impressionistic. It really gives you a sense of the light, of the situation. You see the face of the opponent illuminated by the light from the charcoal. Really, really well described. Nice illuminating effect here. Options. Will you wait until he's beside the low battlements and attempt to throw him over to the side? Should be pretty fun and cool. Use a shuriken aiming at his head, which also is pretty cool. I mean, it's ninja stuff. Most stuff is cool. But whether or not it works is a different thing. Creep up behind him and use your garrote wire, or if you have skill with poison needles, your ability of like spitting poison needles, you put them on your tongue, you roll up your tongue like a little pipe, and you blow to throw the needles. If you have poison needles, will you use one? To prevent this review or overview for becoming too spoiled, I will not tell you what the optimal idea is. But I will tell you what a pretty bad idea is among these options. Throw him over the side, use a shuriken, creep up behind him, or using poison needles. Actually, before I go there, I encourage you, if you want, you just pause this video and think about the description that they gave you the scene and see which one would be a good idea and which of these options would be a bad idea. What is a bad idea? To use a shuriken. Why? Well, because if you paid attention, it's at night, the visibility is low, and there is wind. As I said, the most wind is about you again as you peep out over the top step etc, etc, etc. There's wind, it's at night, there's also rain, so throwing a shuriken in those conditions is particularly hard. What I like, sorry for the spoiler, is then there are three possible options based on how well you're doing. Maybe you're really good and you do hit the opponent, and the text tells you, despite the terrible conditions, you still hit. This is what I really like. The text will tell you not only what happens, but why. If you're successful, the text lets you understand why it is that was the right course of action. So you may be able to hit despite the different conditions, or you may miss by a lot, which is not that bad, because actually, since the night is dark and there is the noise of the wind, if you miss by a lot, it's okay, because the opponent doesn't see you, the captain of the guard hasn't realized what happened, that he has been targeted, and you can choose another approach. But if you miss by just a little, which is the intermediate situation, if you miss by a little, then the opponent is missed, but he also realizes that he's been attacked, he raises the alarm, and it's pretty bad. Which again gives you a sense of how this is a game that encourages a certain simulationist approach. If it were just about games, you know, the lower you roll, the further you are from success, the worse it is. In the real world, sometimes messing by a lot is better than messing by a little, which is what happens here. You're messing or missing by a little is the worst possible thing. It is worse than missing entirely. Then you have lost a shuriken, but you haven't been discovered. This is the approach that the authors took, and I like that a lot. It is really an RPG approach in the purest sense. So many game books came out, and they presented themselves as RPGs in written form just because they used the second person of the verbs. You were doing this, you were doing that, but they did not necessarily feel like RPGs. This one does. Way of the Tiger is a series of game books that has been written and conceived as an RPG, and does this in ways that are unthinkable in other game book series. For this alone, it is one of my favorite game book series because it is intense, it is immersive, it presents you with significant challenges. Yes, sometimes you have the random choice. It's a choice that feels significant, but it's not. You're in a tunnel, you can go right or you can go left. That's a random choice. They could ask you to roll a die. If you have no information to make a decision on, then it is a random choice. And sometimes it happens, which is okay. You should have a random element. But there are the game books in which you're constantly making decisions without the sufficient information, or the result is not really based on your decision. Make a decision that looks, it makes sense, and then bad stuff happens, or vice versa. Surprising, fun, but after a while it feels it's just completely random. This is a series where good play, good gameplay, paying attention to what happens, making right decisions is rewarded most of the time, which makes sense, because actually if you were rewarded all of the time, then the game would be too artificial. In our world, sometimes making the best decision is not good enough, and making a bad decision turns out to be good because you were lucky. So you do have a random element sometimes in the way the decision is connected to the outcome, but in most cases, good decisions are rewarded and bad decisions are punished. And I like this a lot. It gives a sense of realism, of immersion that is really rare in game books, and makes it one of my favorite game book series. Now, as for the execution, so the system is excellent. As for the execution, because again, really, it is in the execution. It is in the way each scene is designed that the tactical feel emerges. In the execution, the first volume of the series, Avenger, yes, you're a disciple in this temple, you learn to be a ninja, and you're avenging the murder of your spiritual father, the master that raised you and taught you everything that you need. So you're pursuing the villain that did it, you are traveling in the countryside. In a certain sense, it is fairly classic game book that is about traveling to capture an opponent. Heck, the Warlock of Firetold Mountain was something similar. You're hunting down the evil warlock and trying to get his treasure. But here you have more of a significant challenge, because there's also a moral element. It is not just a generic villain, but a villain that murders somebody who was dear to you, and also a villain that is threatening to to perform a ritual that will destroy the god that you worship. Gods are referenced here, but they're not omnipotent, omniscient deities like in the religions in our world. They're just powerful entities that do actually rely a lot on the people that worship them. They have their own fights, they have their own quabbles, and the humans participate into the wars of the gods. It feels much more like the gods of Roman and Greek mythology than clearly of more recent theologies in our world. So you're trying to prevent the villains from destroying your god, and you're also avenging a death. Again, structurally, it is a journey, it is a trip, so it's a classic string of encounters that you have. But there is the setting which is innovative with this hybrid between our world and high fantasy. And there's this tactical system of combat, and in any case, tactical decisions that makes it fresh and innovative. It's like the system is new, so the plot is not all that innovative, but there is enough new stuff in here to make the game worth it, to make the game book really unique. Now, you defeat the villain. Ooh, big spoiler here. You defeat the villain if you're successful. And in the sequel, the story continues. And the sequel is a little weaker because it's very similar in conception to the previous one. Yes, you're traveling. Yes, it's a journey. Yes, you have a series of challenges. You're simply going back home and retrieving an important artifact that the villain in the previous book had stolen. So Assassin is the second book, and is probably the weakest to me of the original run. There's nothing really wrong. It is still better than most of the game books out there, but compared to how the first one felt innovative and how the next ones will be innovative, this is a little bit of the weak brother. Nothing wrong, you still have an interesting journey with fights, challenges, with tactical decisions to make. Just after the blast that you have when you play this, it's like, whoa, back in the day especially, there was no game book that had this much tactical depth. This one feels like more of the same, which is good. It's a good same, but just not as mind-blowing as the original one. Now, these two books pretty much complete the first narrative arc in which you are avenging your spiritual father and pretty much taking care of all the consequences triggered by the initial attack of the villain. The villain has taken the scrolls, you defeat the villain in the first book, and you return the scrolls to the temple in the second book. When things become very interesting, is in books 3 to 5. Usurper, Overlord, and Warbringer. In these books, you get to learn about your genetic father. You're an orphan, you were raised in the temple, you avenged the death of your spiritual father, but then you actually learn about your biological father. You avenge that guy too. Turns out you're of noble blood. Who haven't seen that idea? Wow, an orphan that turns out to be a king without a throne. So in Usurper, you learn about your actual origins, your actual family line. Yes, you are the legitimate ruler of the city-state of Irmoncast, and in this book you travel to Irmoncast and you kick out the usurper and you retrieve your legitimate role as a ruler of Irmoncast. So you become the king of Irmoncast if you're successful. But isn't this just a rehashing of the idea, travel to an exotic place, face challenges along the way, and defeat the villain? In part it is, but it is a new element here, especially towards the end of the book, in the second section of the book, which is politics. Yes, the book here start exploring a political dimension which is completely unknown to game books, so at least it was at the time, and it wasn't represented in many game books later. In some game books in the fighting fantasy system, you were told that you were the leader, you were a king, you were the leader of an army, but in truth it's all about individual You're a leader of an army and you were constantly forgetting the army and going on individual missions. You're a king, well, you know what, I'm gonna put on a cloak and grab a staff and pretend I'm just a pilgrim or I'm just a traveler, and you still act as an individual hero, as the classic individual hero. Gamebooks had a hard time creating a collective dimension in their books. Usurper starts doing that because yes, you have the traditional journey of the hero facing monsters and defeating enemies. When you get to Immersive, you had to start doing politics, you had to start scheming, you had to start learning about the city and the various parties that live in it. You have a nice map here, but also you will start learning about the different groups, religious groups, military groups, how do people feel about the usurper that is ruling the city. Simply about the various social groups, and you start weaving alliances. You need to create alliances. At the end, you will not be able by yourself to defeat the villain and to take control of the city. To become the ruler, you need the support of at least some of the parties that have power in the city. Meanwhile, of course, you need to figure out using your usual immersive wisdom, meaning try to think of yourself as in that city, trying to understand what are the thoughts and the feels of the people that live there. Is there a party that is discontent? Are there certain people that are more likely to back you up? How much can you reveal? Can you just go in the main square and say, hello, I am the actual ruler of the city, why don't you just join me and we go and dethrone the present ruler? Is that a good idea? Probably not. So you need to identify the people to whom you can open your heart and reveal your mission. In that sense, this book starts taking on a tangent which was new at the time, has not been explored much in rule books, in game books, because you start having a political dimension. And this, if you do win the game, defeat the villain and become the ruler, then you enter my favorite book of the series and one of my favorite game books of all times, Overlord, which is a book that explores politics and presents you with challenges that no other book had done before. You are the leader of a city, and sometimes you regret, you're like, oh, maybe it was better and definitely easier when I was just an adventurer going out there slaying monsters and grabbing their treasures, like having at the game book series and in some of the earlier books. It's never really about grabbing treasures, but slaying monsters, fun, and it is an element in this series. But here you have to manage a city, you have to collect taxes. You collect a lot of those, well, you have a lot of coins in your treasury and people hate you. So actually here there is a popularity rating, and if it goes down, it's pretty bad. When things go bad, if your popularity is low, well, the people will revolt against you. They'll figure out that you have become just a new tyrant. And actually, that is probably the case. If you make decisions that bring your popularity rating very low, you have become a tyrant. Maybe you do deserve to be replaced by another ruler. Maybe it turned out that your noble mission, that you thought it was a noble mission in the previous books, was really just a power grab. You told yourself that you were a better ruler, but you're not. To me, this is really cool. This is really neat because it really tests your ability of making decisions in a complex net of challenges which are not the traditional ones. It's not about, well, me am good here or he am bad orc, so I have the higher moral ground and I can slay the orc and grab the treasure and I feel good about myself. It really is not just about making right decisions, but it is about a gray moral landscape, which is something that you do not find in many fantasy novels in general. Evil and good in fantasy very often are metaphysical entities. Here is about shades of political of moral grayness, and it's about shades of political complexities. There's a certain party that may be slightly morally corrupt and has a bad reputation, but maybe it's good to have a connection with them. The spies that helped the previous ruler are hated by the people, so associating yourself with the spy system of espionage of the city will alienate some popularity. But is it a bad idea? Are they truly still loyal to the previous rulers, or you are pretty much getting yourself hated by the people and seeking help from people that hate you? Or are they an independent system? They are a true system of espionage. They simply serve whoever is the ruler. So maybe the people hate them, but they will help you. Or there's a previous counselor that was popular with the previous tyrant, meaning the tyrant liked him, people despised him. So again, you had to figure out if associating with them, with yourself, associating with that counselor of the old tyrant is a bad idea. Will alienate the people? Well, will that help you? There's a representative of the people, clearly a dreamer who likes, who fights for the people, and associating yourself with him will most likely help you be liked by the people. But is he a good counselor, or is he a naive counselor? Maybe he's well-meaning but clumsy, does not understand politics. So early on in the book, the biggest decisions that you make are when you're interviewing various people that are pretty much applying for the job of being part of your board of counselors, and you have to choose which are the ones that you want to keep close to you. So the spy master, the previous counselor, the previous tyrant, the guy that represents the will of the people, a religious leader, a leader of a group of warriors, and various other, and then leader of the guild of the merchants. Which are the people that you want to keep around? And so in the alliances that you form early in the book, you create a range of possibilities, because later on that will have a ripple effect, and many different challenges that you face will be harder or easier based on who are the people that are backing you up. And again, you have these constant situations and challenges that simply feel like, well, you wake up in the morning, something bad has happened, and it's not just a single, well, let's go and defeat the villain, let's go and grab the old artifact. It's not a single goal. Your goal is to be a good leader of the city, and you have a sense of complexity, you have a sense of swinging, changing situations in which no situation is clear-cut, no situation is the best one. That really gives you a sense of a political complexity. This is a policy or politics, a simulator, the likes of which I haven't seen in other game books. Maybe there are game books out there that I do not know do something similar. Let me know. I want to read them. This is like mind-blowing, especially when you play fighting fantasy games. Completely different, because you have a sense of complexity of many moving parts, of no clear-cut solution, no silver bullet that will always get you out of trouble. And it really there's no other games the game book that I read that really I had the sense that I was a ruler of a complex political organism where everybody has demands and no one really likes you and everybody always blames you for everything, and you still have to keep the city afloat, to keep it going, and to fight off also the challenges. There isn't much fighting. There isn't much martial arts here. It's really about political wisdom and political arts. Amazing, really unique book. So you see how these books, starting from after the second, which is traditional journey, defeat monsters, they start experimenting with different game elements. Here you start having a political element of alliances. Here is mostly about politics. And here, Warbringer, it's about the military. It is a war game in a book form, in a choose-your-own-adventure branching book format. Yes, there's still a quest. Yes, you still have the journey. But then there is a part of the book where you have to fight a battle. Well, first, actually, early in the book, the quest element is about you forming alliances with other city-states to try to defend your city against an army of enemies. So you have to first read about the possible city-states that may help you and figure out which are the ones that may be interested in aligning themselves with you. Is there a history of enmity between you and those other cities? Do they like or dislike the army that you need to fight against? Are you going? So some people are more likely to help you, and maybe some people are well-meaning, but again, not very strong. So you have to choose where you're going to seek for help. So first you have the journey where you're looking for help, you're seeking help, and then you go back and the army of the opponent is approaching your city, and then you have a war game. Again, a war game in a written form, in a prose form. You're given a map and you have decisions to make in war game mentality. You have to analyze the map and get a sense of the strength of the various groups, the morale of the various groups, the speed that they travel at, the maneuverability, the reliability, and you make decisions about where you will be in the battle, encouraging people and trying to use your skills, and where everybody will be. So you'll send out different groups to do different things. And the situation evolves and develops like a war game. Again, a paragraph-based war game with different maps. I'm not going to show the other maps too much. Different maps showing you how the situation progresses. Oh, you've done that, then that other group has been outflanked, and that other group has disappeared. And those people that you counted on have not joined the battle when you wanted to, but then that other ally shows up at the last minute. So you have to think about the situation spatially. You have to think about the situation exactly like you would approach a war game, with that kind of challenges, with those elements in mind. There are some individual fights and combats, but definitely that the system again presents you with something that usually game books did not. This is a system, a system that pushes the boundaries of game books from the beginning, when you have the tactical combat inspired by ninja movies, but then it still pushes the envelope and expands the boundaries of game books in really incredible ways. Overlord and Warbringer are by far my two favorite books in the system, some of my favorite game books of all times. And really, Warbringer is where the big story should have ended, where the series should have ended. In Avenger, you avenge your spiritual father, and then you restore the initial situation. Here you have a trilogy, really, the Irmoncast trilogy. You take control of Irmoncast, you rule it in times of peace with some war happening, and then you rule it and you come out as a good commander in times of war. And at the end, you are simply the king of a city that is working, is on its feet, and is not threatened by armies, is not facing an immediate threat. It's a perfect ending, and this is where it should have ended. Alas, I guess that the authors wanted to exploit the set a little bit more, or maybe they had a contractual obligation. There was a 6th volume that came out that feels entirely foreign to the original run, and it really goes back to the beginning. It's more traditional. It's about, well, you're trying to rescue a friend that has been kidnapped by evil forces. And you've seen this. It's a traditional game book, and if we hadn't had these two books before, maybe this would just feel like pretty good. You know, nothing wrong with it. But it feels incredibly flavorless, and it feels incredibly flat after the mega blast that you have had in the previous books. The experimentation, the ambition that these books have, and how actually they managed to live up to the expectations. And then you have, well, you're traveling and you find monsters and you go down a dungeon trying to defeat an opponent. So it's pretty average, nothing too wrong with it, but for the fact that it exists after those ones, it feels like a weird epilogue. And there's something even worse about it. It's not really an epilogue because it ends with a cliffhanger. At the end, you are imprisoned yourself by an evil monster, and you had to wait until the next book to see what happens. Unfortunately, Volume 6 is where the original run in the 1980s ended. So they had a phenomenal, beautiful ending of an epic story, and then they added a chapter which was left incomplete, which is of a much smaller scale, and it ends with a cliffhanger. You are trapped by the evil villains, and this is where the series ended. So pretty much this book ruined the original run. You had this beautiful thing, and then at the end is left there in the middle of an action which is unresolved. And that's where it ended. So for 20 years, fans of The Way of the Tiger knew that really this is the story, and then you had the 6th volume that felt like a bad dream, like a bad decision on so many levels. The execution is nothing to write home about, and it opens a story that was perfectly closed and leaves it incomplete. We transfer to another location to symbolically mark the distance between the original run of Way of the Tiger and 2 volumes that came out in recent years in the system. And one is the end of the story and one is a prequel. Yes, finally, the end of the story, the sequel to Inferno that at least gives us an end to the epilogue, concludes the disgraceful thread that was launched in Inferno when the story was perfectly told, had been perfectly told in the previous 5 volumes. At least now in Redeemer, we get to know what happens to our hero after he was trapped by a fierce enemy at the end of Inferno. Here you start from that situation, you have to escape from the prison, and then you have to go home and resolve a couple of other situations. It is really, it's a nostalgia experiment, well, picking up picking up a thread after 20 years, there's a certain nostalgia element, but also the way the book is written, the way it's structured has a nostalgia element, in the sense that there are many characters from the previous books. It is almost an anthology. It is almost like a review of the characters that you became familiar with some 20 years ago when you originally read the book, or a couple of months ago if you read the books for the first time in this new 21st century edition. But in any case, after you have read the 6 books, in this one there are a lot of other people that you encounter, almost too many of these people. It was almost like, I don't know, was there like an invitation up for the party they didn't see? Why is everybody here? So there are a lot of people that come up to you and you say, oh, look at this, my old friend from volume 4. Oh, this is the monster that I tried to defeat in volume 3 and he's still hunting me. That's a very perseverant monster. Many miles and 20 years later, the monster is still there. This is not a fictional example, it's actually something that may happen in the book. So it is good. It is good that we have an epilogue, and it seems to be an epilogue that is constructed to play on the nostalgia element of the reader. Other than that, it is an inferior book to the previous books, especially to the previous, the first 5 installments in the Way of the Tiger line, because it doesn't feel as tactical as before. It doesn't feel like the decisions are as tense as before. It doesn't feel like studying the scene before making a tactical decision pays off. It doesn't feel that there is that very strong connection between environment and an outcome that you have in the original books, and that make those books so so unique. Also, differently from the previous 3 books, which experimented with politics, with warfare, I thought it would be nice here if they tried to again broaden the field of wargaming, I meant game booking, broadening the field of game books by expanding into some other discipline after, again, wargaming and politics. I don't know what that could have been, but it would have been nice to see a book being different from yet another journey, yet another quest, which is what this book is. So it is definitely inferior to the previous ones, in my previous opinion, for it doesn't have tactical depth, it is fairly straightforward and more conventional structurally, but at least we have an epilogue. And the authors are the 2 original authors plus another author, David Walters, who also must be a big fan of the series because also is the author, the sole author of Ninja, that is Way of the Tiger Volume 0, a prequel, again published in the 2010, written and published in 2010, what's the year? 2013. So, it is a book that happens before Avenger. Now, Avenger, the previous book, as you may remember, opens with our protagonist graduating from ninja school, pretty much, and going on an adventure. So this has to be before the graduation. In fact, the protagonist here is very young and is going to a big contest where, believe it or not, you need to travel to various cities and collect flags. It is a catch the flag type of competition, a fantasy world with ninja. I'm all for hybridization of elements, and I think the world of Orb, where the tiger is set, has a great example of hybridization. Here, however, it feels too much like kindergarten to me, like all those elements plus kindergarten, grab the flag. I don't know. In the previous books, sure, the previous books that I've read, they happen after this book in the world of Orb, but you have become a lord, you have become a military leader, you have become a king, and now you are a kid going around to catch flags. To start with, the entire idea of the competition, so you can prove yourself, feels a little empty, feels a little shallow. It doesn't have the same sort of strength that the previous books have. There's more thing at stake in the other books, and this one feels, well, back in the day, had I read this one first, when I myself was a pre-teenager, then I would have had that connection with the protagonist, who is very young at this time, and maybe going around and participating to this big game where you collect flags and you have to pass tests would have been fun. As is, it feels a little empty, feels a little bit of an unnecessary prequel that doesn't really add much. It's tough to write prequels that kind of like feel significant, that explain, retcon things, and maybe cast light on things that were written without the prequel in mind. It's very hard to make a good prequel. Look at the disgraceful Star Wars prequel trilogy. So maybe we shouldn't blame the author too much, but still it is a very weak book. It is very weak in general. So we have, in conclusion, 5 phenomenal books. The Way of the Tiger, volume 1 to 5, excellent, some of the best game books that were ever published, in my very humble opinion. Tactical depth, tough decisions, strong sense of story, very evocative prose, an incredible sense of immersion. Those 5 volumes create an epic story that is a joy to immerse yourself in. You will spend a lot of hours enjoying the world of Orb. After that, things are not as good. You may read 6, 7, and 0 just to be complete, just to see what happens there, but definitely they're not nearly as tense and gripping and interesting as the previous volumes. In general, give a try to the world of Orb and Way of the Tiger. Maybe you read them back then, now get the new edition. They look good, they're nice, and you know, many things that I read back then and I reread now, the magic is gone. I say, oh yeah, that's stuff that I really liked when I was 14, the magic is gone. Not here. If anything, I swear, appreciate the tactical depth more now than I did back then. I didn't even realize that the story, that the tactical depth was so important. I haven't realized that the decisions would pay off so well. I was following the story and enjoying. Again, coming from Lone Wolf, coming from fighting fantasy, I didn't even realize that these books really were written with such a strong sense of thematic cohesiveness, such a strong sense of a world that pays off to think in terms of a real world that you're in, that you're exploring and you're interacting with. So I don't think I'm just speaking out of nostalgia, say this is a great series. I think actually this is a great series per se, not just because I enjoyed reading it back in the day and it was fun to go back to those memories. No, I think it's a strong story because it's a strong story. This is a strong series of books, at least for these 5 volumes, simply because they're well-written books with a strong story, fun, deep tactical challenges, and I highly recommend it to anybody who has any interest in game books.